Okay, topic for today is warehousing and distribution, so we start getting a little bit closer to some of the nuts and bolts of distribution. So I'm going to cover two fundamental strategies today. Direct shipment from suppliers or manufacturers to retail stores, and intermediate stock points, which are typically warehouses and or distribution centers. And as I go through it, I'll cover off these various points. Yeah? Now, distribution, these are the steps taken to move and store a product from the supplier to the customer. That's a nice, gentle introduction to distribution. I don't even think I need to put that on a flashcard. Now, there are a couple of options. There are lots of options, in fact, but I'm just going to pick on some of the main ones that you'll come across. First of all, I'm going to discuss manufacturer stores the product, then directly ships to the end location where the product will be consumed, perhaps as a component or perhaps to an end consumer. Direct shipping with in-transit merge, that becomes very clear in a moment. But basically all that means is that we ship from a manufacturing location, and perhaps there are other components needed from other suppliers, and then we will merge these together to make one coherent delivery to the end point of the line. Rather obviously, if we are taking things like baked beans and tomato ketchup and all the rest of it for a retail operation, then we would have an intermediate point where we bring these together and then merge them, put them in one transshipment to go to the end retail store. Otherwise, what happens? You have lots of trucks, in principle, lots of suppliers, attempting to get at the retail outlet at once. And this causes problems. We can't really manage that too effectively. Finally, distribution storage. We have a package carrier delivery, which is more or less, I guess, the white van man type of approach. For the last mile or so, particularly in consumer-oriented deliveries, then that last mile is handled by little men with white vans, or little women, I presume that, women as well, running around in white vans and delivering the products. Now, direct shipment strategies. There are some advantages and disadvantages, of course. And I've taken a retail perspective here because principally, I guess, the retail industry will have some of the most complex types of distribution strategies to cope with. If you think of a big retailer like Tesco, they will be handling all sorts of normal consumer staples, like the bread, the milk, and the rest of it, fresh food, as well as the longer-term stuff, as well as clothing, perhaps some consumer durables like white goods and brown goods. So quite a complex approach to organize, and they use a broad range of all of these strategies at once. Now, direct shipment distribution. Retailer avoids the expense of a distribution center, obviously, and we actually tend to mix this up depending on product type. But they don't need a distribution center, and in principle at least, as you don't have a cross-docking or an unloading and reloading, etc., then that lead time story which I just introduced before we started, where we have all of these steps in the chain, if we can remove these steps, then the overall lead time becomes shorter, but more importantly, becomes less variable. And that's the main trick that we have to do. It's not simply a matter of reducing the time, the average time, but reducing this variability. And so this is a very important advantage of, in principle, direct shipments too. Disadvantages: risk pooling effects are negated. When you do have a distribution location, then you're pooling the risk of the distribution of variability in the demand by pulling together and keeping the stock in a location. There are some disadvantages as well for the manufacturer and distributor. Clearly, their costs will increase. They are sometimes forced to take this stuff to the retail outputs. As I mentioned, probably, I must have mentioned it earlier on, Sainsbury's and the way they treated Philips lighting many moons back, asking us at one stage to do direct deliveries and asking for a discount for that, and at another time saying, oh no, we want to have our own distribution centre, and as that reduces your distribution costs, we also want a discount for that as well. So they were really playing a game. But in principle, a direct shipment is a lot more effort to organise from a manufacturer or supplier's perspective. And normally for trucks and that sort of stuff, that would be outsourced and other people would do it. Some issues. Retailers often require fully loaded trucks. We mentioned during the logistics video, I think by Logistics Organization, that one of the types of losses that we have in the distribution chain is ullage. Yeah? And this is where you have trucks or containers and they're not fully loaded. And you're in effect transporting air around the place. So there are losses there. And also retailers want to have, as much as possible, a full truckload or full consignment delivered to their location. So they can minimize their inbound logistics costs and generally reduce their order costs and the rest of it. It's normally mandated by powerful retailers, and so organizations such as Tesco, they're in the news at the moment for their rather odd way they treat their suppliers, but retailers will insist on it. Going back to the Sainsbury's situation with Philips, at that time, when they insisted on direct deliveries to all of their locations of lighting products, it was under the threat, and it wasn't a hidden threat, that if you did not do this, oh Philips, you would be delisted and you would not be delivering to our organisation anymore. So it's quite a severe penalty. And later on, when we look at things like vendor-managed inventory, direct deliveries into some of the major American retail outlets, such as Walmart, they, in my opinion, probably are overstrong in the supply chain and perhaps are unethical in some of these practices. When they insist that suppliers have to use their technology, for example RFID or whatever, or directly deliver to whatever location under the threat of delisting. That means you're out. Yeah, so it can be quite severe. And indeed in Sainsbury's and Tesco's have delisted a lot of small suppliers as a result who went subsequently bankrupt. Lead time is critical, especially in grocery. That's rather obvious, particularly in fresh foods, fruits, very goods which can rot and go away very, very quickly. It's rather obvious that lead time is critical. And also, most retailers do not like, because we do not like, we always look at the labels, the use by date and sell by dates and the rest of it. They tend to shorten those to make sure that we're happy. So there's a lot of pressure on lead times to be as short as possible and to be as static as possible. Suppliers may be reluctant, but broadly speaking, they have no choice. In the case of Tesco, which is going on right now, their suppliers have to pay their money in order to get a favourable location on the shelves. And that's the problem they're having right now, that they took that money in advance of the actual supply delivery and put that in the accounts as profits. And so there are all sorts of problems right now. But hidden behind that is the fact that an organisation such as Tesco can say to their suppliers, if you want to have a good location at my store, in my store operation and a good position on the shelves, then you must play ball. You must give us this money for promotion you must give us this money in order to get a good location on the shelf. So it is a problem that retailers can have just a little bit too much power in this area. Make sense? What do you think of this? Christian?
Yeah, I have a question. How is this happening actually in here actually when it was
retailers such as these people, or large or important members of the supply chain, like Dell, and most big manufacturers are like that, then you can demand certain things from your suppliers. And you're in such a good negotiating position that those costs, so yes, okay, X works, and you want it at your location. If it's strong enough, then you can insist that the supplier absorbs those costs. Yeah? So it really, this business about the supply chain being this nice and friendly operation is not quite there. It really is, and people are doing their own business, of course. They want to make profits themselves, but some of these retailers have a lot of power and a lot of influence on how the supply chain is configured and managed. So manufacturer storage with direct shipment, one of my cheesy diagrams, I'm afraid. So suppliers along the top here, and direct shipments. And the blue lines, and so retailers sitting on the side, they're not doing any work, which is probably the nice position to be in. And so they're just taking the blue lines represent the money. So in this particular case, the orders are usually taken by retailers. They maintain the customer contact, of course. They pass these orders back to their suppliers, who then have to deliver directly some way to the customers. And money's taken by the retailers, of course. Fairly straightforward, and a very nice position to be in. All of the risk, to some extent, is with the suppliers in this particular case. And usually, not often, but usually the retailers will take the money ahead of the delivery as well, just to make some money out of this stuff. Intermediate stock point strategies. So intermediate stock, all it means is the stock between the suppliers and the eventual consumers of a product, be that business to business or consumers. Mainly distinguished by the length of time the inventory is stored at warehouses or distribution centres. Now, in a traditional warehousing strategy, warehouses hold stock and provide the downstream customers with inventory. Basically a classic situation. So big warehouse, the stock is in there, it's an Amazon situation, automated warehouses. When an order comes in, then we take it out of stock to satisfy the demand reasonably quickly. If we get our service levels right, then the lead time to the customer can be quite short, and we can deliver them straight out of stock. Cross-docking is where they serve as merge centres and distribution centres and transfer points for inventory. Sorry. I'm going to just come to that in a minute. And there's also centralised pooling and transshipment strategies. I'll edit that piece out later. And so that's where several organisations come together to organise the inventory. They pool it. They may be in competition with each other, but they decide in a distribution strategy that they will pool the inventory, they will pool the product, and then distribute that to each other based on their actual demand. We have a small case study on that later on. What are the problems? This is what it looks like. Suppliers move their product into an in-transit merge, so they put it in a truck, and they send it to a stock location where it's taken off the truck, merged, perhaps in third and fourth party logistics. They do some work to it, some repackaging, some combination. So they take one product from one supplier, they'll take another product from a completely different organization, put these together, perhaps wrap them, put the documents, and then send that out as a consolidated product to the end consumer or to the operation. Yeah? The money flows back more or less the same way. Retailers not doing any work here as well. and in terms of the distribution side of things. Very, very common approach. And distributor storage, this is where it's going directly, so the information and the orders go via the warehouse back to the suppliers, and the retailers really are just doing a drop shipping operation. That makes sense? So these are the basic models. Direct shipment, in-transit merge, with the retailers on the right-hand side there, taking the information flow, so the information flow going back via the retailers, and to the final third type of option, where the suppliers send their product to a distribution center, that goes on to the end consumers, and the information flow is via the distribution centers. Yeah? Quite a tightly integrated supply chain. Not very common. Yes?
Question. On the in-transit one,
Oh.
who does that bit? Is it the supplier or the retailer? If it's different suppliers?
It varies a lot. Can be a lead supplier who runs the distribution center. It is more common to have it outsourced and as a third party. And so a logistics operation will set itself up with the transport, the movements, the warehousing and the rest of it, and handle all that. And it can be, in Sainsbury's case, as it was for us, that they run the distribution centres. It was actually a captured internal organisation, so it was run completely separately from the retail operation, but they ran the distribution with Sainsbury's wagons. Yeah? So it can vary. So all models, and they make it a balance. Okay, if a supplier has to run a logistics operation, those of us who know the outsourcing world a little bit will know that that takes more effort, more management time, and the rest of it. You can perhaps buy that service from a third party, and that is much more effective for you. You do want to be bothered with that part of the distribution, particularly if your product is incorporated a lot in other as a component, that you might be quite small comparatively to the end consumer part. So it does vary a little bit, and all options and all ownerships are possible, and it's a balance organizations make, how much they're going to do internally, how much they're going to retain, and how much they're going to place into the market. Third-party logistics, basically a third-party organization, a separate organization doing that, is very, very, very common. That's the most common approach. Just like to touch very briefly on some of the warehousing functions. The logistics people probably do a little bit of this as well, so I don't have to do too much detail. Has Thanos covered this type of stuff, warehousing, distribution?
Not yet.
Okay, he probably will. He may do a case on it. Yeah, so I'll just keep it pretty brief so we can just make sure everybody's up to speed on this. 3 basic warehousing functions, you're not surprised. Movement, storage, and info. Now the movement piece covers all of these labels on the left-hand side there. Cross-docking, very quickly I'm going to come to that. Light assembly, very common in distribution chains nowadays. At the very least, a lot of repackaging is done in the distribution centres. Blending and kitting, so pulling together products. This is taking different components from different suppliers and putting together in one consolidated unit for distribution. Labeling and shrink wrapping. Okay, so labeling. Most of Gillette razors, for example, are wrapped in distribution centres where they have the specific labels and the languages handled and all the rest of it. And Gillette will manufacture their razors the same for everybody, and they ship them to these distribution centres for the final piece of light assembly. Breaking bulk, all that means is, I suppose Heinz baked beans will send off a huge truckload of beans to cover the entire country in one go, and then that gets taken apart and broken down into smaller units for end distribution. So breaking bulk means just taking it down. They will send a huge shipment of product that is broken down into components or sensible units for further distribution. Transporting, obviously, and import-export services also handled during the movements, and bonding, i.e. keeping bonded goods under control and paying taxes. So alcohol, for example, and that sort of goods are kept in bonded warehouses where they're kept under tight control. So that's all the movement stuff that goes on, and all of this obviously needs management and control, and so information systems, just jumping across to the right-hand side, are really, really important in these types of these operations, because there could be a lot going on there. So inventory tracking, obviously, favourite topic of mine. Order entry, proof of delivery, PODs, are very important. And so when you send a product out to your house, if you get something directly delivered from Amazon, when that guy scans the barcode or gets you to sign it, that is a proof that the product has actually been delivered to you. It's actually very, very critical, to be quite honest. We had a lot of problems with particularly wholesalers taking product from Philips, and it was sent there, and some very expensive equipment was sent to them, particularly lighting luminaires, and we haven't received it. We didn't get it. Not sure where it is. Can you send some more? Now, there's a little bit of, I suppose you'd call that shrinkage going on there. But you need proof of deliveries is a very important process, as probably Christian would agree there, to organise properly. Tracking and tracing, where is the product? That's all that means. You need to know where it is in your distribution chains, quite tightly. Service reporting, obviously, stock out, delivery times, the schedules. Did you meet your delivery times? What's the distribution of that? Do you have a particular supplier who has a poor delivery record? You need to, perhaps purchasers may have to address that issue. Carrier monitoring, the product gets moved around in trucks. How do they do that? How efficient? Do they hit the schedules properly? Do they have enough people and the rest of it? Utilization is very important. You have these big warehouses, and believe me, you monitor more or less on a daily basis the utilization. How full, crudely speaking, are these warehouses? Because you usually get charged for a particular volume in a warehouse, and it's up to you as an owner of those warehouses to fill them up, because otherwise you're paying for fresh air, in effect. So managing utilization of the warehouse itself and of the resources inside the warehouse is quite critical, and monitored very, very tightly. So you usually get paid on the clock how much you're using. And network and routing, a whole can of worms about how to organize trucks and deliveries to get them around the country in an optimal way. Actually, that's an impossibility, what I just said. So the routing problem can't be solved. But more or less, to try and smooth out the worst problems in networking. And storage, obviously, the receiving of goods, putting them away, or these terms, I'll put them all up on flashcards, putting them away, they're on the dock, and we have to put them in a stock location. Make sense? Simple. Picking them, taking them out of stock, and then assembling them, usually in a location, ready for sending out by staging. Then loading them onto trucks. So lots of things to do, yeah? So it's not just quite a simple operation. And some of you will end up doing this type of stuff, yeah? So warehouses are used to store product or assemblies, raw materials, parts, goods in progress, finished goods, all of this stuff, point of origin and point of consumption, all of this, that's what they're basically for. Provides information on the status of goods, where are they, what position they're in, how much encapsulated value is there, and so forth. Some of the issues we have to balance with warehouses, particularly this make to stock versus make to order. Inventory costs money. A big warehouse obviously costs a lot of money. If you're producing too much stock, then you are tying up a lot of assets in stock, in the location, and so forth. And we need to make sure that that is kept under control. My personal opinion is you can never reduce it to zero, but you have to at least try and manage it properly. Number of warehouses is something we have to think about. It comes up in the Lego case and perhaps in JCB on the operations people. Where do you place your warehouses? How close do you put your warehouses to the end consumption point? Do you have a regionalized strategy of warehousing? Do you have a very localized strategy, as some of the suppliers of Dell might have, where they have a logistics operation fairly close to the point of consumption? It's driven by Dell to reduce those lead times, but that's some of the main problems. Inventory policy and turnover ratios, we've still got to manage it. And internal warehouses versus an outside distributor. That's a question of sourcing. Should we do it ourselves, or should we hire a third party to handle this for us? And we look at in a minute whether owned by a single firm or a variety of firms. That's this question of pooling. Should a couple of organizations, let's say retail, come together to manage a distribution chain together? Okay, a few more of these, then we'll do a short case study and have a break. So distribution centers are a type of warehouse that hold minimum stock of high demand goods. Warehouses, minimal added value. Data collection is in batches to minimize the shipping costs. It's the main thing. Receives, stores, picks and ships. Try and minimize these. Distribution centers tend to have more of an added value orientation rather than just holding the stock. So can include final assembly, as I just mentioned. Tends to have real-time data collection. This is a manufacturing operation. And looking at maximizing, or at least attempting to look at, in traditional warehousing, stock management and risk profiling are key. It comes back to the inventory management stuff. Cross-stocking is where warehouses and are inventory coordination points, popularized by Walmart in the US, where goods arriving get in through the door from the manufacturer and more or less transferred very, very quickly in this operation and straight out to the stores. Very little stock held at the location itself. The main purpose of this is a transference, is to move things from the supplier effectively into the Walmart operation. They spend little time there. The idea is virtually nothing, and so there's no racking in a Walmart cross-docking location. There's just a place where they put the stuff before it goes on to the next truck going out. So they spend very, very little time inside the operation. So, and the idea, when you put stuff on a shelf in a warehouse, that's time wasted, let alone the money. So it's sitting there. That's adding to your lead time, and it's adding to your lead time because you've got to put it away and take it back out. All of that can be eliminated in such an approach. So it's transferred from the vehicle from the supplier and delivered to the retailer, Walmart in this situation, as quickly as possible. It takes a lot to start it up, but it gives a very fast and responsive approach to demand. Walmart have imposed this to some extent. Again, they're very powerful players in the supply chain in the States, and so are able to move this forward. And it's only useful, as I put there, in my opinion, you can completely disagree, effective for large distribution systems. And this business about ullage, the loss of capacity when you've got half-empty trucks. So it works for a big system when you have lots of things moving around there, and you want to shuffle them out very, very quickly to the end consumer location. The other thing I want to look at before we have another short case is centralized pool systems. Now this is an approach where, I mentioned earlier, several retailers maybe come together and say, we will pool our inventory. We will store all of the baked beans for Sainsbury's, Tesco's, and Lidl, I suppose now, together, and we will draw from that pooled stock to replenish our own stores. So we put it in one location. We share that location's stock between us, And that is what a pooled system is about. So for the same inventory level, centralized systems can provide a higher service level, at least in principle, because you're pooling the demand from several retailers in this particular case, and you can smooth it out a little bit more effectively when you pool the demand. Now, push-pull supply chain, moving from push supply, where dealers have to order before demand is filled, to a push supply, where the dealers pull from a regional distribution warehouse. Now, the overall idea behind a pooled system is that the end consumers should see a better customer service overall as a result of pooling the risk between several retail suppliers in this case. So pooling inventory, good thing, do you think, all the time? Not sure. Let's have a think about this.